Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the 1,775 poems of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 40, When I Count the Seeds. It's a fascinating little poem that will maybe mirror some of the stuff we were talking about in poem 22, over related to rebirth in nature, and the idea that that proves somehow the notion of the immortality of the soul. Certainly one of the central ideas for Emily's work is that question, what happens after death? It takes us back to Plato's Phaedo, as we've already said, and in earlier comments, especially on poem 22. Speaking of that, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist, and that I'm hopeful that you have already exposed yourself to the intro lecture there, especially as we were talking about our Big Five, and the last of those Big Five, the question of theodicy, that is to say, why must there be pain and suffering in the world? And of course, the ultimate question is, death itself. And I'm hopeful as well that you have worked with the previous poems. I just mentioned 22. We've now worked all the way up through poem 39, Did Not Surprise. Now, our background here to read this poem, and I think this is probably pretty easy jump to make, is that this is one of those when, then constructions that's easy to learn from your study of Chaucer, and I'm pretty certain that Emily enjoyed her study of Chaucer. And to that degree, you can run our lectures to ground at learnstrong.net. You'll remember that the opening lines of the general prologue, when in April the sweet showers fall, it's a when, then construction. And as well, you're familiar with it in a writer like Milton or Keats. Of course, think about Keats, when I have fears that I may cease to be, then on the shore of the white world I stand alone and think that when, then construction is at play. Let's just enjoy the poem. When I count the seeds that are sown beneath, to bloom so by and by. When I con the people laid so low, to be received as high. When I believe the garden mortals shall not see, pick by faith its blossom and avoid its bee, I can spare this summer unreluctantly. Now again, it is a when, then construction without the word then. It's as if Emily is playing a Chaucer-like game, and she wants us to make sure that she can adapt and therefore not use the word then. Notice, it's a pretty simple poem in terms of its word picturing. The sound is brilliant as you hear it when you read it out loud. When I count the seeds that are sown beneath, that is to say, of course, the number of seeds that have died, to bloom so by and by. Notice, and my Emily group pointed this out to me, it's brilliant. Notice that the spelling of by and by is not the normal B-Y, but rather as in goodbye, as in it's time to leave. But the idea is that you put the seed under the ground and the seed dies so that it can live in the form of blooming of the flower. The second when I con the people, that is to say, consider, right? When I con the people laid so low, all the people who have died, to be received as high, that is to say heaven, that is to say post death. The third when I believe the garden mortals shall not see. Now this idea of faith and belief will be contained in this poem. Of course, the minute we hear the word garden, we're thinking, of course, of Genesis 3 and the Milton account. We've given full lectures of Paradise Lost at learnstrong.net. Certainly Emily will have Milton standing behind so many of her poems. When I believe the garden mortals shall not see, pick by faith its blossom and avoid its bee. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about why bee is capitalized here. There is an interesting number of scholars that have said the bee here might represent the sting of doubt. In other words, no longer is there any doubt. Once one has died and gone on to heaven, there will be no more doubt, she's speculating. When I consider the fact, in other words, that all of this death has led to life, this will sound very much, of course, like Whitman's passage 6, A Song of Myself, then all of a sudden, although she doesn't use the word then, I can spare this summer, but notice it's unreluctantly. And by the way, unreluctantly gets used as an adverb only one time as a word in all of her poems. It's only here one time. Well, what is it that she's really arguing in this poem? I think what she's saying is faith does help to deal with the idea of death. And she says, I'm willing to consider it because I can see in the world of nature that things die so that things can live. So I'm willing to accept that notion. She says, but it's kind of unreluctant. I'm willing to do it, but I'm only willing to do it periodically. A lot of times she says, I'm kind of reluctant to be excited about the idea of losing those that I love through death. At 2B, as we mentioned, this win-win-win then construction I think is a lot of fun. We'll see that she'll play this game more than a few times. I think she's borrowing this from her study of earlier poetry. At 3A, well, obviously we mentioned Chaucer. Milton comes to mind. Keats comes to mind as well here in our study. I mentioned Plato's Phaedo, no question. There's the drink of the hemlock, and Socrates is ready to drink it. And his students are all sad and crying, and he's excited because he's giddy. He's going to go on his next journey. By the way, he is not reluctant at all to get on to the next life that he must live. And of course, any number of other titles come to mind. John Donne's Death Be Not Proud, and on, right? Finally, at 3B, what are your thoughts about how you consider the notion of rebirth as you study nature? Does it in fact give you comfort the way, for example, that Whitman will express it in Song of Myself, Passage 6? You can go back to Talks with Walt, and you can run that lecture to ground to hear those comments again. You'll remember that even there he says that death is not what we thought, man, it's luckier to die is what no one expected or supposed, and luckier. What are your thoughts about that? And just reading a poem like this and watching seed planted in the ground, invisible and then grow to bloom, does it give you any sense of hope or expectation? And how do you handle the question, the theodictic question of immortality? I hope Emily's helping in that regards. Thank you.